I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our April session of Nichols Strategies Digital Accessibility PLC. Our topic today is change management and road mapping. For any of you who are new to this group, welcome. My name is Emily Popek. I'm Vice President for Strategic Communications with Nichols Strategies. We are a small but mighty PR firm that specializes in working with schools and school districts and other local education agencies. We are not digital accessibility specialists. We are communications professionals just like you, but we've been trying to do a lot of work around this issue lately because I know we're all facing that upcoming compliance deadline. So we're trying to provide you with good guidance and resources to help you do your jobs effectively. So our topic today is really two topics, but they're connected. So I'm going to start off sharing some suggestions on how we can navigate change in our organization, how we can be smart when we're working to initiate change around accessibility. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we take big problems like I have 9 million inaccessible PDFs or 100 different vendor platforms and get our hands around them so we can attack them in an efficient and a strategic way. After that short presentation, we'll have an open discussion together on some of the things that are either working for you or some of the challenges you've run into when it comes to these issues. So I'm going to hold questions until the end, and the presentation part of this session will be recorded. So if you have to jump off early or anything like that, just know that you'll get a link to a recording in your email after today's session. So I want to talk first about change management, about how we approach change within our organization when it comes to accessibility, because this issue is not neutral, right? The changes we're advocating for when we push for more accessible practices are not small or minor things. In a lot of cases, they are seismic changes. They are massive changes in practice that we are proposing or suggesting or exploring. And in a lot of cases, the changes that we are recommending or considering or evaluating are outside of our lane. They impact things other than communications. They impact the work of people in other departments and in other sectors of our organization, right? So how do we approach the process of advocating for these big changes in a way that is smart and strategic? So one of the first things I think that's important for us to keep in mind, I'm having trouble advancing my slides. Bear with me here just a moment. There we go. Okay. I think I've shared this slide before, maybe even in this group, but I think it's really important to keep in mind, and we all know this, right? That the ship of public education makes course corrections very slowly, right? Change does happen in our sector, but it does not happen fast, and it does not happen without good reason. Our leaders are only going to say yes to change when doing nothing seems like a bigger risk. So if we are trying to initiate change, if we are trying to motivate change within our organization, big changes, we have to find that thing that will motivate our leaders to say yes. What is that thing that will drive them to want to take action so that we're not dragging everyone kicking and screaming down the road toward accessibility? And the answer to that question, what will drive them to want to take action? It's going to look different in different organizations because it has a lot to do with the leadership culture of your organization and the leadership priorities of your organization. Our school districts, our organizations are not cultural monoliths, right? But when we think about what motivates change at a leadership level, what drives people to take action, sometimes we can start to see some patterns on how our leadership team approaches big things, big changes, big initiatives. Think about things like the COVID school shutdown. Think about things like adopting a new curriculum, things like closing or opening a school building. The way that your leadership team has responded in those big moments has created expectations throughout your organization about how change is initiated, how it's managed, and how it's communicated. So let's look at just a few examples of some of the things that can drive change at the leadership level and how we might navigate those differently depending on what that looks like. So one binary we can consider is how democratic our leadership model currently is. Is this a leadership environment where the leader makes the decision and that's that, where chain of command and following protocol and procedure are really important? Or other extreme? Is this the kind of environment where there's a committee for everything, where we have to take a survey before we can even, take a breath? These are sort of two extremes, right? Most of us are going to fall somewhere in the middle. But think about how much input factors into these big decisions within your organization versus how often big decisions just get made at the leadership level without a lot of input. Because navigating one side or the other of this extreme is going to look very different, right? The more authoritarian leader might feel really impatient about like doing a lot of committee work, doing a lot of staff surveys, things like that. But they might respond to an appeal to order. If I were to say to that more authoritarian leader, listen, it's the Wild West out there. You've got people just doing whatever they want. They're not following procedures. I really think we need to get them in line. That kind of approach might be more motivating than saying, well, let's take a survey and see how people feel about this, right? I worked under a superintendent who was very much like this. And when the law came down in New York State, some of you are going to know what I'm talking about, that required us to be much more diligent about student data privacy concerns. Our tech director let the superintendent know that different buildings and different grade levels were using different tools for school to home communication. We had some people using Dojo, right? Some people using Remind, et cetera. When the superintendent heard that, he was like, right, so we're not doing that anymore. We're going to get one tool and everyone's going to use it. And that's that. Case closed. It was not a democracy in this district, right? We didn't take a survey. We didn't put together a committee. He made a decision and that was that. And that was often how big decisions were made in that particular organization. Now, take the other extreme with a more democratic leader. You may be in a leadership environment where, that one conversation at the cabinet level is not going to be enough. You may be in a leadership environment where a lot more conversations with a lot more people are going to have to happen before that leader takes action. They're not just going to take your say-so for it. If this just sounds to them like just something that Emily's all riled up about it, they're less likely to pay attention to it. But if I can show that more people are impacted, if I can bring some data, if I can enlist some allies, that may be more likely to resonate in this type of leadership culture. Let's look at another binary or dichotomy. If I can get my slides to advance. I don't know what's going on here. Okay, the arrow key is always there for me when I need it. So another dichotomy that we might see is the balance between facts and feelings. Are you a data wall district where data is king? Or is this a work environment where people's feelings become the most important thing in the room? Again, obviously, most of us are somewhere in the middle, not at one or the other extreme. But think about which of these two things tends to be more galvanizing as far as moving your leadership team toward action. I know I've heard people remark that sometimes just like the simple facts and figures do not always seem to be enough to motivate people to take action. That dynamic is real. If we are operating in a feelings first leadership culture, we got to do some hand holding, right? We got to make time and space for people to feel their feelings. Change is not neutral. We talked about this in our February session, that when we, ask people to change the way they're doing things, it can bring up some really emotional responses from people. And if you are in a feelings first workplace, if we try to blow right past those feelings, it will not work. But we also might have the other extreme, where if we kind of can't show our work, if we don't have the receipts, if we don't have the data, it's going to get ignored. Mr. Spock here does not care about our messy human emotions, right? He wants us to cite our sources. My former editor, who was not in fact a Vulcan, would nevertheless always be like, oh, are a lot of people worried about X, Y, or Z? How many, Emily? How many people were we talking about? He was motivated by facts, not feelings, right? Journalists in general are guilty of this. Facts excite us, superlatives do not. So think about what is more likely to motivate action within your organization. What gets people to sit up and take notice? Is it that story that really tugs on the heartstrings? Or is it the data, the facts and figures to back up what you're telling them? Sometimes it's a combination of the two. All right, last dichotomy I want us to think about, and this is a little bit more of a sensitive one, but I think it's real, is the tension between, excuse me, bear with me a moment. Sometimes there's a tension between like wanting to actually do the right thing versus wanting to be perceived that you have done the right thing. Wanting to win versus, just doing what is right. These are not always contradictory positions, but what we're thinking about here is what motivates people to take action. On the one hand, is your organization one where at the leadership level, there is a very political lens applied to everything? And I know that some of you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to say scheming, but when you have that feeling that there's a lot of like three-dimensional chess being played on the leadership level, right? Where there's a lot of thinking about like the next move and the counter move and how to position themselves and how to position the district. This is an environment in which appearances are very important. This is an environment in which what's getting said about the district is very important. Now, I should say, I believe that the vast majority of the people we work with want to do the right thing and will do the right thing. I don't think our school districts are being run by supervillains, right? But I do think we've seen with this issue in particular that the simple fact of it being the right thing to do is not always enough to motivate people to take action, right? So if you are in an environment where perception is really, really important, we might need to lean into that and frame this issue in terms of the optics. How will it look if we don't take action on this? How will it look if we get left behind? How can we get some positive press for doing these things, et cetera? Again, it's maybe a little bit craven, but if that is what your leadership responds to, then we can put this issue into that frame. On the other hand, if your organization is really mission driven, if there really is a culture at the leadership level that is deeply driven by purpose and like very, like uncynical and earnest, then the fact that it's the right thing to do might be enough. Sometimes it is enough to know that, this is just simply the right thing to do. And that's a sufficient reason to give it our time and attention. This is probably the easiest leadership environment in which to make our case, right? Because we don't have to tie ourselves in knots to make the argument that this is the right thing to do. But this is all about just understanding what motivates your leaders to sit up and take notice of an issue or to take action on it, because it's going to look different in every organization. And, the way we might be thinking about this issue might be different than what our leaders are going to respond to. So I want to share this model for change management with you. Some of you may have seen this already. This is called the ADKAR model. It was developed in 1996 by a guy called Jeff Hyatt. And it provides a framework for us to think about the elements that make lasting change possible. Not just doing something differently once, right? But actually shifting practice around, some area of work. So according to this model, there's 5 necessary ingredients that make lasting change possible: awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And what Hyatt is arguing here is that these are sequential, that you need to establish one before you can establish the next. So look at where desire falls on this sequence. It's the second thing, right? It comes right after awareness. So what Hyatt is suggesting is that we cannot succeed in any of these other areas in imparting knowledge, building people's ability, reinforcing those practices, until we've established that desire to support the needed change. So if we try to skip ahead, if we try to jump straight to, like teaching people how to write alt text or making sure they understand, why something should be in HTML rather than PDF, Hyatt argues that we're not likely to succeed at establishing lasting change if we have not yet established that desire to support it. I think the word desire here is really interesting. Hyatt didn't say we need to establish willingness, or we need to establish agreement, or even consent. He said desire. And I think desire is a really powerful idea because desire pulls us in a direction, right? It's more than just sort of like dragging our feet and going along with something. It's more than doing the absolute minimum. Desire means that we are drawn to do something. We have a strong why. So to establish that desire in the people we work with, we have to establish that why. Why is this important? What is the benefit to changing my practice? What impact will I have with this action? And what would be the impact of inaction? What happens if I don't do this? And this is where I think we can really lean into those values that drive our organization to take action when we answer that why question. All of us in this group can rattle off a bunch of reasons why, right? A bunch of reasons why it's important to adopt accessible practices. But the way we answer that question, I think, is going to sound different in different rooms of different people, depending on what we understand about what motivates them. So this, I find myself saying this a lot recently. I think this is really an issue where, as PR practitioners, we have to use like all the tricks we have up our sleeve, all the tools in our toolkit to motivate change on this issue. Because we know and we have seen and we have found that it's not as simple as just saying, like, well, it's a federal mandate, we got to do it. We know that's not enough to really motivate the level of change that I know many of us are working toward. So let's switch gears a little bit because there's another piece of this puzzle that I think can be challenging. We've been talking now about getting to yes. How do we get to a level of agreement? I want to talk now about what happens when we have that yes. We now have to figure out how we're going to move forward. How do we tackle this big, big problem, this big issue within our organization? What do we do first? What do we do next? How do we move forward? How do we organize our thinking? How do we get our hands around a problem that might feel massive? It might also feel sort of unknowable or opaque. So I'm going to give you one way to kind of break this process down into bite-sized pieces. And spoiler alert for my fellow APRs or APRs in training out there, you're going to find this process distinctly familiar. But I think it applies here. So, and if you're not an APR and not in the process of earning your APR, you're about to get a crash course in the four-step planning process. So the place I always start is research, right? And that is just a fancy way of saying, what do I know about my situation? What do I know about the status quo? What do I know about the things that are happening right now in my organization with regard to accessibility? And then how do I know what I know? What is perceivable or measurable or quantifiable, right? Like not just vibes, not just a hunch, not an assumption, but actual information. What do I know and how do I know what I know? How do I know how many inaccessible PDFs we have? How do I know if the pages of our website, meet the WCAG standards or not, right? How do I know what I know? What information do I actually have? And what don't I know? Sometimes this is just a brain dump. Maybe it's like a narrative, maybe it's a bulleted list, but I try to put all this information down on paper because this is how I figure out what I know and what I don't know. Sometimes I'll pretend like I'm describing my organization to someone who knows nothing about it, just to push myself to be objective and to seek out the facts and start to see what do I actually know about what's happening here. Is there more information that I am going to need to really understand this issue? Do I really know what all digital platforms and systems we're using across this organization? If I were to sit down and try to describe or enumerate that, do I actually have that information? The absence of data is data in and of itself, right? If neither I nor anyone else in my organization can quantify any of this stuff, then that's our status quo. That's what we know right now. Whatever I know right now, that sets the stage. It establishes a baseline and it tells me this is where we are at today. We want to move forward from this baseline, right? We want to see some kind of measurable change happen in a positive direction so that we aren't still here, a year, 2 years from now. But we can't quantify that without establishing the baseline first. This is true of anything we do in life, right? If I want to be able to do 50 push-ups by August, I need to know how many I can do right now. I need to establish that baseline, that starting point, before I can think in any meaningful way about, what my goal might be, how I would move forward, and what that forward progress would look like. So this is where it all starts, is just being able to put down on paper what you know about the status quo, about what's happening right now. Once I've done my research and established that baseline, the next thing I would do is define my goal. What am I trying to tackle? And I think it's really important to view goals not as a thing we do, but as a place that we arrive at, a state of being. So when I think about goals, I try to ask myself, if I did all the things, if everyone said yes to everything, and I had all the money in the world and everything went perfectly, how would my status quo be different? What would success look like? Where would I end up? I've quantified my present status quo. I know what my situation looks like now. Fast forward a year, 2 years, everything has changed. What do things look like there? That's my goal. That's the place I'm driving toward. That's the place I want to end up. So, what might that sound like? My goal might sound like all documents created in my organization will meet accessibility standards at the time of creation. Wouldn't that be nice, right? That's a future goal. That's different than my status quo. But it's not an action either. It's a description of a state of being. That's where I'm hoping we'll end up after I put in the work, right? My goal also might sound like all staff will understand basic principles of accessibility. Maybe that's where I want to end up. Maybe that's that endpoint that's important to me. Again, these are not actions. These are like places where I could be in the future. Because it's really, really easy to focus on the stuff and the things, the tasks, the things on the to-do list. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. We're going to do this. But what I'm pushing you to think about is to answer the question, if I do this, that, and the other thing, what will be different? How will things have changed if I do those things? What are all these actions driving toward? What's the why behind them? Because I think that that's a really powerful way to think about our goals. So what's the next step? Once I've done my research and I've established my goal, I know what I'm driving toward. I'm going to push myself now to define some measurable objectives. These quantify measurable change. They tell us who it is that we need to take action, what it is we need them to do, and then to bring some accountability to it, we try to define some specifics around it. I think it's really important to keep in mind, again, it's really easy to think about all the things that I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to make a template. I'm going to do a training. Those things alone don't actually change things in your organization, right? Change happens when other people do things. So who are those other people? And what is it you need them to do? Our success is almost entirely dependent upon the actions of other people, right? We can give trainings and provide templates and install software till we're blue in the face. But what we actually need is for other people to do things differently. We need people to use the templates and apply the learning from the training and use the software. So when we write objectives, it's all about those actions. Whose participation is required for this initiative to succeed? And what is it we need them to do? So what might that sound like? Teachers will present classroom materials as machine readable text. That's a specific action that we want that group of people to take. It might be that web authors will provide meaningful alternative text for images uploaded to the website, right? That's what I need them to do. These are all examples of things that I need other people to be doing. And when I have that clearly defined, again, I can put some accountability parameters to it. What's the time frame for this action? When do I think we can accomplish this? Are we talking about, this month, or are we talking about next year, right? And then the very last piece, which I think is really important and often overlooked, is what is that measurable quantity of change that we want to be able to observe? That sounds really convoluted, right? But this is where our research comes in. If I have 7,000 PDFs now and none of them are accessible, okay, in year one, how many do I think we're going to get to, right? Maybe I want to shoot for getting 25% of them compliant within the first year. What's that change from baseline? And those two things go together, when and by how much. They should be connected, right? By September 1st, how many web authors will have gone through training? By January 1st, how many of our web pages will have been scanned? Because in the absence of this kind of rigor, it is impossible to evaluate success. It is impossible to know if you've actually made progress toward your goal, whatever you define that goal as. Objective writing, I find it really hard. It's a rigorous mental discipline, but it's also really, really important because in the absence of this rigor, it's very easy to end up focusing on entirely the wrong things. We can focus entirely on outputs. I gave this many trainings. I created this many templates, and that's great. But as my former boss would say, so what? What impact did those actions have? If we focus on whose participation we need and what we need them to do, that really helps us keep our eye on the prize and keeps us driving toward those actions that are most likely to have a true impact and generate real change within our organization. So what's next? The next thing to do is think about strategies. I need all these different groups of people to do a bunch of stuff, right? What's the smartest way for me to go about this? What levers can I push that I think will help make this happen? A lot of this goes back to those questions of culture that we were just talking about, right? Those things we talked about are strategies. Does it make sense within the context of this group of people to lean more heavily on data or to do a little more storytelling? Those are strategies, right? It's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's thinking about, in your situation, from where you sit within your organization, one or the other approach might be more effective in this situation. Our strategies are informed by our resources, right? By what's possible for us. I might think that it'd be a fantastic idea to create an entire accessibility department in my organization and hire like 12 people. That might sound like an amazing strategy, but if you're in the middle of budget cuts, it's probably not going to happen. So, thinking about how our organization does operate, thinking about what is possible, thinking about how change does get pushed through or filtered through our organization. Think about initiatives that have been really successful in your organization versus the ones that, have kind of like fizzled out. What can you learn from how those things were implemented? What strategies have you seen in your own workplace be effective versus ones that maybe kind of fell flat? And what can you learn from that? And then the last piece of this is where, the rubber actually hits the road and you actually get to make that to-do list. If my strategy is to take this idea to cabinet and get buy-in and have all my department heads, kind of push this out through their departments, that's going to inform the steps I take next. On the other hand, if my strategy is, to like engage with some external expertise for training and support, that's going to inform the steps I take next. This is where we really think about what actually needs to happen for these objectives to be realized. We map out a timeline and we think about, time constraints. Sometimes we map that out backwards, right? If I know that I want to hold these trainings in September, well, what do I need to do in August? And then what do I need to do before that in July? We do this every time we plan out a publication, right? I do this every time I have a newsletter. Start with that print date and work your way backwards. Or we work it forward. This is what I'm going to do first. This is what I'm going to do next, so on and so forth, and see where that takes you. And what are the resources of time and dollars that will make all this possible? And, why do we do all of this? Because what I find is that very, very often when I sit down to actually map out these tactics, again, this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where you realize, like, oh, if I start this now, I'm actually not going to have the training built in time before the school year ends. So this really is about to become a next year problem. Or you realize, oh, I actually don't know what software the coaches are using to send messages to their teams. Let me pause, get some more information, adjust my plan. That's the point. That's the point of this process. And that's why this process is effective, because hopefully, if we take the time to map this out up front, we're going to spot some of those pitfalls before they happen. We're going to get some of those questions answered before we get too far down the road. And, be able to adjust better when we do hit those road bumps. This is obviously not the only way you can approach a big project, right? But I think that this level of discipline is very powerful when we are dealing with things where the scope and scale is really large, like accessibility, and things that are interdisciplinary, where we need to be engaging with a lot of other stakeholders within our organization. It's not just something that we're going to sit at our keyboard and do it all by ourselves, where this level of planning might not be necessary. But this is one way to wrangle big ideas, get our hands around them so that we can move forward with purpose, with strategy, and with some insight into, what we think is going to be effective. So that's my pitch for RPIE and how to apply it to accessibility. We're going to open this up for discussion in just a moment, but before we do, I just want to preview our next PLC session. We're going to have a roundtable to talk about compliance. I'm going to have a few updates for you, some news related to the Title II update, a couple of interesting lawsuits I want to share with you, some other news from the field, and then we'll talk as a group about kind of where our organizations are at. When we think about the idea of compliance, so that we can hear what this is looking like within different organizations. I have one more PLC scheduled for June after that. This was a great session last year, so I brought it back again this year. We're going to talk about wins, goals, and plans. Just as a word of warning, if you were on that June session last year, I may ask you about the goals that you told us about last year, so we'll see what happens. But I want to both look back on the school year that's passed and look ahead to next year. I want to celebrate all the things that you all have accomplished this year, because I know a lot of you are doing some really awesome things. I'm planning some sessions for the fall now, but if you have suggestions, ideas, requests, if there's specific topics that you want me to dig into this fall, please let me know, especially if you would like to be a guest co-host or presenter, or if you would like to volunteer anyone else to be, please let me know. I'm planning that out now. I know many of you have also been participating in our digital accessibility cohort. Those sessions are wrapping up this spring, but I am keeping a waiting list of anyone who's interested in a future cohort. So I'll drop that link into the email that'll go out to everyone after this. And as always, you can find all things PLC at nicholsstrategies.com/PLC. That's where this recording will go as well when I upload it, and all of the notes from this session will go there too. and you'll get all that in your inbox within the next few business days. So with that, I'm going to stop recording and open this up to some discussion. Bear with